I recently started watching Hazbin Hotel after it was recommended to me by a friend, and it's amazing. I was very interested in the setting, and I knew it had a lot of songs. As a musician, I was looking forward to them, especially because I'm not familiar with musicals in general, and this was a chance to discover something new. The show started really strong. The first song, Charlie's song, A Happy Day in Hell, happened kind of out of nowhere, but it had brilliant melodies. The instrumentation was well done. The song used very clear different genres to great effect, and the singing was quite impressive.
From the porn studio where the cinephiles go to watch award-winning TV Bukkake shows, to the cannibal town where they don't wear a frown.
The lyrics, not so much.
And I don't give a crow that his brain's got in my eye.
But I was very positively surprised and quite intrigued. The next few songs were okay, nothing remarkable to me. The lyrics did get better though. Overall, I was enjoying myself. And then came Poison. The song is genius. I have no other words. The show had already set extremely high expectations with its previous numbers, and Poison exceeded them by far. There's honestly so much to say about the composition of the song, the lyrics, and even the video. So let's have a look at what makes this so great. I think to understand the impact and the composition of the song better, it's important to have context of who Angel Dust is and how the show presents him before the song plays. Angel is introduced to us as this character of ambiguous gender. Seriously, I had no idea if he was a boy or a girl until like episode 4. He's an actor for adult film and he has no shame whatsoever. He takes a lot of pride in what he does, and he defines himself by his work, which honestly are red flags, but hey, he's in hell for a reason. Overall, he seemed like a very flat character, and I wasn't too interested in him. Until episode 2. After Charlie says, "Someone interested," for once, Angel is shown deflating and spirals into depression when he realizes that Sir Pentious is getting attention and praise for his fake attempt at redemption. It's obvious that the comment hurt him, and that made the character significantly more interesting to me. It revealed that he genuinely cares for the Hazbin Hotel, even if his demeanor suggests otherwise. So his airs of superiority turned out to be just a facade, and I was interested to explore what was hidden underneath. Luckily, the 4th episode is about Angel's work as an adult film actor and gave a lot of insight into what really is behind this full of himself, overly cocky, seemingly one-dimensional star, and the song ties into that in a brilliant way. The song is in C minor, at least the vocals are in C minor, we'll see about that later, but the choice of the key is not interesting in and of itself. It is very common for composers to adapt the key to the instruments that are going to play the piece in order to make it easier to play. And this song covers a pretty wide 1.5 octaves, so the key was probably chosen to really fit within the singer's range. In terms of structure, the song is built with 4 measure units of C minor, A flat major, and F minor. Each stanza is made of 1 unit of C minor and 1 unit of A flat major for a total of 8 measures. And finally, the first verse and the choruses have 2 stanzas. The second verse is 1 stanza. The bridges are 1 unit in F minor. There is a 1 unit introduction in C minor, and that's the whole song. The structure ultimately is not too interesting. 4 and 8 bar units are extremely common in classical music and in pop music as well. Either way, the one thing to note is that the second verse is only half the length of the first verse, which speeds up the arrival of the last chorus, which is important for reasons that we'll see later. Overall, the song is structured in a very simple way, and the simplicity of its structure leaves room for a lot of complexity in other aspects. The ensemble for this song is pretty small. There's Blake Roman, the singer. There is a synth thingy, another synth thingy, a bass guitar, and the drums, which is what we'll start with. The drums play a simple loop of 2 bars with a slight change between the verse and the chorus. and keep the loop consistent throughout the entire song, with the exception of the last chorus. I don't have much to say about the drums, everything about them is fairly common, but it's not a bad thing. It lays the groundwork for all the layers of complexity that go above them. Let's have a look at the bass guitar and the first synth. I'm grouping them because they do essentially the same thing and they play very similar roles together. We'll see about the introduction and the bridges later, but during the verses and the choruses, these two instruments just hammer away at the root of each chord, with quick pass by the fifth to lead into the next chord. The constant, nearly uninterrupted rhythm gives a frantic feel to the song. There is no room for breathing or gathering your thoughts. It's a never-ending stream of notes that build a very oppressive bass line. This is represented very well in the video with the constant motion, the flashing lights, the constant changing of the scenes that don't give the viewer any room to breathe. Now, there is something very important to notice here. Do you remember the range of the vocals that I talked about earlier? Well, this is it during the verses, and this is where the bass and the synth are actually playing. The two instruments envelop the vocals with one of them sitting directly behind them, and I think together they represent the stable, overwhelming part of Angel's story that is Valentino. The fact that the two instruments basically never change pitches also relates a sense of permanence and immutability, which is very representative of Valentino's power over Angel. It's interesting to note that during the last chorus, the guitar stops playing completely, and the synth continues playing almost the same. It doesn't leap to the fifth anymore and stays on the root, and the vocals now sit slightly above the synth, as if Angel had managed to escape from the influence of Valentino to tell us how he really feels, but Valentino is still there somewhere in the background. To continue with orchestration, the second synthesizer is interesting because it is most of the time not in sync with any of the other instruments. It functions on the basis of a two-bar loop like the drums and repeats constantly throughout the entire song. The left-hand part repeats the same tresillo rhythm on the roots of the chords and is mostly hidden behind the other synth. Normally, the tresillo creates tension with syncopation, but given the rhythmic intensity of the other instruments, the other synth and the bass, this rhythm becomes the new pulse that the right hand of the synth and the vocals are going to match up against. Talking about the right hand, it is interesting because it uses a lot of dissonances and its rhythm mostly does not match the pulse created by the tresillo. The dissonances are very simple and resolve properly immediately. In the C minor stanza is just a series of passing tones, and in the A flat major stanzas there is an appoggiatura, a lower neighbor, and an escape tone. I do want to point out that between the C minor and the A flat major stanzas, the melody is expected to resolve up to the E flat, but instead of that, leaps down a crunchy seventh to the E flat, an octave below. The expected resolution from D to E flat is there, but not in the way we were expecting. The melody becomes tense and incomplete, and this gives it a sense of gravity, especially considering the relatively lower pitches compared to the stanza before. And this sense of gravity keeps building until the melody finally resolves up to the E flat in the next stanza. Even then, the leap of the seventh is still there between the right and the left hand, emphasized by the sudden rest in the right hand, and diminishes what should have been a really bright resolution. This unexpected leap is actually repeated within the A-flat major stanzas themselves, where the melody is expected to resolve down back to the A-flat, but instead of that, leaps down to the E-flat again. This creates a double dissonance right in the middle of the stanzas and isolates that E flat as if it were not an intended part of the melody. This in turn creates a lot of tension, especially in a measure where all the rhythmic tension that had been building up before is resolved by realigning with the tremolo rhythm. One last thing. Between the C minor and the A flat major stanzas, this synth commits a counterpoint crime. With the C moving down to the A flat and the D moving down to the E flat, the two voices move in similar motion to a perfect fifth, which creates what is called in counterpoint direct fifths or hidden fifths, and is strictly forbidden. The reason for that is the effect it has on the voices. By moving together in this way, the two voices kind of merge together, and it can become difficult to tell them apart. In this case, though, I have no doubt that this is fully intended, and probably the reason why this leap is there in the first place. By having the two voices merge on the downbeat, it gives the impression that the upper voice disappears for one beat, and that keeps it consistent with the C minor stanza where the first beat is always omitted. With all this, what can we say this instrument represents? Well, it consistently sits above all other instruments, it's not in sync with any of them, it's the least busy of all instruments including the vocals, and it carries a lot of tension within its melodic writing. Without a left hand that provides the pulse upon which the song is based and that shares its range with the first synth, this synth would be completely isolated and would not feel like part of the song. Its melody is a struggle where all the important resolutions at the end of each G-bar unit fail and leave us with a sense of longing and craving for something to go right. Ultimately, I think this instrument represents a part of Angel's life that is hidden, and that is his hope. The fact that during the last chorus, which is where Angel tells us how he really feels, this instrument is still playing and is actually very prominent, means that it is there for him to explore, but the isolation and the tension that the melody carries with it represent how fragile and out of reach hope is for him. Let's have a quick look at the introduction. As I said before, it is entirely in C minor with 2 parts of 2 measures each that introduce the different elements of the song. The very first thing that is shown to us is the tremolo rhythm in the second synth, with that right-hand melody as well that I talked about earlier. The tremolo is repeated in the first synth with some decoration and a very slow crescendo to the point where it's basically impossible to hear in the very beginning and only comes up about halfway through that part. The first synth then stretches the tremolo rhythm to 1.5 measures until it settles on the constant droning quaver rhythm on the tonic of the chord. The bass guitar joins 2 octaves below with a slight crescendo, and the drums are introduced through a lick, I think it's called a lick, and re-establish the tremolo rhythm at its original timing.
And action.
Overall, this is a fairly stable introduction, but it already has a lot of rhythmic and melodic tension carried by the second synth with the tremolo and the melody, but the gradual introduction of the instruments, especially with the crescendi, slowly moves it to the background. As we saw before, the bridge is just 4 measures in F minor. The first synth and the bass guitar start consistent with what they were doing before, starting on the tonic F, but instead of staying there, they slowly walk down by step towards the dominant C, which, if you remember, is the tonic of the song. However, they don't quite reach their goal. Instead, there is a heavy silence, and the instruments only resume playing after a pause, exactly on the position where the second synth would be. This sudden absence of the tremolo rhythm, even if it is still hinted at in the drums, reverts the song pulls back to default, that is the common time signature, except this default pulse is not marked by any instruments. This creates a subtle void in the instrumentation, which makes the bridge stand out and contributes to the weight of the vocals, as we'll see later. Additionally, this void prepares a sharp increase in tension through the descending bass line towards the C, technically a second inversion F chord, which is highly unstable, and the unique drum pattern in the third measure. Except, none of this tension is resolved, especially with the bass line not reaching the C. Even the second synth, Angel's very hope, is silenced, and the only noise we get is the rapidly waning release of a powerful sub-bass. The song hangs in an uncomfortable suspense, and the silence just makes this worse than the expected resolution more daily required. When it finally comes, it's an unfathomably satisfying triple resolution. The silence finally ends, the bass finally finds the C it was reaching for, and the rhythm resumes exactly where it was expected to. This is why it was doubly important for the second synth to stop as well. I really want to emphasize how perfectly this bridge is put together and how crucial it is for the tresillo to stop. The tension created from the lack of pulse is the foundation for this build-up, the nerve-wracking silence, and the release when the song resumes. So let's compare what the bridge would sound like with the tresillo and with the regular common time pulse. Now, this is where things get interesting because the harmony is not as simple as it seems. Remember how I said that the song was in C minor? Well, within the context of C minor, let's look at the available chords. C minor is a minor 1, A flat major is a major 6, and F minor is a minor 4. Now, 1, 4, and 6 are very common chords in pop music, but here's the thing. The dominant 5 never actually shows up. The dominant is important to establish tonality because it is the chord with the strongest pull to the tonic, so its absence here makes the song's harmony not as obvious as it seemed. Now, the relative major of C minor, that is, the key with the same key signature of 3 flats, is E flat major, but since it doesn't appear in the song, it's not worth considering. So, what other possibility is there? Well, it could be an A flat Lydian, that is, A flat major with a raised 4th, in this case D natural instead of D flat. The song is very upbeat, and that would typically be more fitting for a major key, especially given that the song ends on an A flat major chord instead of the expected C minor. But even for A flat, the dominant E flat major is nowhere to be seen. So I said earlier that C minor was minor 1 and A flat was major 6, but is this really true? What if C minor is a minor 3 and A flat a major 1 instead, making F minor a minor 6 instead of minor 4? This would change a lot of things. Assuming the song is in C minor, then C minor and A flat major are both tonic chords with some level of stability to them, and F minor is a very unstable chord, a predominant, with strong pull towards the absent dominant and some pull towards the tonic. But if it's an A flat Lydian, then all 3 chords are tonic chords of various levels of stability, 1 being the most stable and 3 being a particularly weak tonic chord. On top of that, remember I said that the dominant to tonic or 5-1 was the strongest cadence? Well, it just so happens that the dominant for the bridges in F minor is exactly C minor. That means that if we look at the key being A flat Lydian, the C minor stanzas have very strong pull towards the bridges, much stronger than the pull the bridges have to them if the key is C minor. That makes them even more unstable in this context and strips them away of the feeling of home they had completely, either as the strongest tonic in C minor or a weak tonic in A flat Lydian. What does this all mean for the song? Vocals aside, the key to the song is uncertain and the harmony ambiguous throughout. What seemed to be the tonic C minor turns out to be the most unstable of all 3 chords used in a way, and the only sense of stability we get is in these A flat major stanzas, especially with the song ending on 1. That means there is no real sense of home and nowhere for the music to gravitate or return to. This isn't a song about a journey, it is a song about being lost. Angel doesn't know where he is or where to go. All he knows is that the only form of stability he can find and where he's stuck isn't where he wants to be. I want to return to the second synth for a moment and highlight a very specific part of it. I know I said earlier that this was simply a passing tone from E flat to C, but to my ears this motif functions as an unprepared suspension within the measure itself. In counterpoint, a suspension is a specific form of dissonance that is introduced in fourth species. The counterpoint moves to a consonant interval over the cantus firmus, then holds that note into the next measure where it becomes dissonant and is then resolved always down by step. This movement to the consonant interval is called preparing the suspension, and it must be done on a weak beat, held over a strong beat, then resolved on another weak beat. In this case, the suspension is unprepared because the preparation I explained doesn't happen and the melody moves directly to the dissonance. Although technically it is a passing tone, within the motif itself it sounds like an unprepared suspension to me. What's important here is that within the context of the song, the motif doesn't move from dissonance to consonance like a normal suspension. Instead, it moves from consonance to dissonance, completely inverting what was expected, while still feeling like a suspension, not unlike a cadential 6/4 that subverts the tonic chord into instability. This flips the idea of which note actually is the dissonance and makes both of them feel unresolved and out of place. This motif appears again through the rest of the second synth part, flipped upside down for the second half of the C minor units, then just transposed in the first half of the A flat major units. Its suspended feeling actually significantly worsens for these because the preparation I talked about earlier does happen, which strengthens the dissonance, but on a note that should have been the strongest consonant, the A flat being an octave above the bass, and then the A flat appears once more as another dissonance, a passing tone. This really shakes the feeling of A flat being a point of relative stability, except it was the only point of relative stability that we found harmonically, and it leaves the second synth wandering from instability to instability, never finding a place to rest on or call home, all while the other instruments are very comfortable in their harmonies. With the interpretation that this second synth represents Angel's hope, this ambiguity with the dissonances places it as an outlier, an intruder to the rest of the instruments, and highlights just how alien and out of reach hope feels for Angel. It's time to talk about the vocals. I'm going to look at the vocals as an instrument first, and I will look at the lyrics later. Also, I don't have access to the stems, so I can't isolate the actual vocals, so if I have to illustrate something with sound, I will be using a clarinet instead. Let's look at the verses first. If you remember, the first verse has 2 stanzas, and the second verse only 1. Well, the melody is the same for every stanza. The structure is once again very simple, it's just a sentence form. There is an idea, which is immediately repeated, but the repeat is slightly modified. The first idea steps up and then back down, but the second one instead stays on the same pitch, then leaps up, which is a great way to introduce tension that leads into the next part of the sentence, the development, which is followed by a cadence. Every part of the sentence is roughly 2 bars long, so the structure here is very textbook, almost simplistic. Melodically, however, there is nothing simple about this. It stands over just 2 chords, C minor and A flat major, whereas in a more regular sentence form, you would expect a little more harmonic movement, typically the first idea being on the tonic, the second on the dominant, then the harmony moving away and then back to either tonic for a perfect cadence or dominant for a half cadence. Here, the melody carries the tension all on its own. It starts very simply on the tonic of the chord end of the piece, this C, then leaps down to the dominant G and stays there with a simple upper neighbor decoration through that A flat. It then repeats the same motion, but instead of stepping towards A flat, it stays on G for a beat, then leaps up to the B flat before moving on to the development after. What's important is that not only is the melody syncopated, it is syncopated differently through its structure. The idea and repeat of the idea start 2.5 beats late, but the development and cadence realign with the measure. That means that the second idea is shortened. Instead of lasting 2 full bars or 8 beats, it lasts about 5.5 beats and is cut short by the arrival of the development. This works because of 2 things. First of all, the end of the second idea and the beginning of the development kind of merge together because they repeat the exact movement we had within the first idea here with this resolution down by step. Then this is reinforced because the end of the idea, here this G and this B flat, behave like a double neighbor leading into the A flat that starts the next measure, and that B flat is also the 7th of the local chord C minor, so it is expected to resolve down by step, which it does. So the transition between the second idea and the development that cuts it short provides a very satisfying double resolution that is also familiar, which is why the melody continues so seamlessly even though the structure was truncated. The development and the cadence both stand on the same A-flat major chord, and like in the first idea, the development starts on the root A-flat, then leaps down to the dominant E-flat, except here the leap is preceded with this sort of unidentifiable dissonance on G. It could be seen as a major 7th of an A-flat major 7 chord, but given it doesn't resolve properly and interrupts a familiar melodic movement, the leap down from tonic to dominant, I think it functions as a dissonance. The cadence repeats this exact melody, but this time the dissonant G has a very clear function as a passing tone from A-flat to another dissonance, the F. Then, instead of stepping down back to the E-flat as expected, the melody steps back up to the G, which finally takes a new function as a major 7th. That makes it a point of extreme tension because, as we saw earlier, the 7th of the chord needs to resolve down by step, but this G is also the dominant of the key and has extremely strong pull back to the tonic C. The vocals end the stanza on a particularly unstable point, like a half cadence, even though harmonically and taking into account the other instruments, we're actually on the most stable chord. Overall, the melody becomes increasingly unstable as each stanza progresses. It starts very comfortable on chord tones, root and dominant, with a simple and very close dissonance, the upper neighbor, but then the dissonances become progressively more foreign and longer. The G returns as a really alien dissonance, I can't even put a name on it, and the entire cadence is just a series of dissonances piling up, with its double passing tone refusing to resolve and instead acting as a lower neighbor from a dissonance to a note that is highly unstable. At the same time, through the development and cadence, the longest lasting notes, these low notes here, progressively move upwards from E-flat to F to G towards the same point of instability, which emphasizes it even more and makes the vocals all the more unresolved. There is one more layer to this. Do you remember the motif I discussed earlier? The vocals are built entirely around it, but distorted and broken up by those repeated notes, the same ones used by the instruments that represent Valentino. As we saw, the motif establishes that its first note has a function of unprepared suspensions, making it the unstable note. And this is something we know because the motif was played in the introduction. That means every time the motif appears, the first note is turned unstable. That means the C here, which we had identified as the tonic, becomes unstable itself, and the only stable parts of the first half of the verse's stanzas are those dominant Gs. Then the A-flat at the beginning of the development seems to be a point of rest, especially with that double neighbor pointing to it, except it actually acts as a passing tone between B-flat and G, and that is the actual role of this unidentified dissonance here. It destabilizes the A-flat by being the actual destination of the central motif, while being a dissonance itself. This is repeated in the cadence, but worse, because the G becomes destabilized in turn towards another, more intense dissonance, the F, and then finally, the G that this entire melody has been moving towards is yet another dissonance, as it anticipates the consonants here in the next measure, which switches back to C minor. To me, the presence of the motif for Angel's Hope from the second synth as the core of the vocals, but broken up by a rhythmic motif that represents Valentino, is a representation of how strong Valentino's hold is on Angel. The constant instability and chain dissonances show that even though Angel is speaking honestly in the song, he does so from a place of pain, not hope. The vocals are very static and almost always resolving downwards, which gives them a sense of gravity, hopelessness, and finality. The slow rise in the longest notes from one dominant E flat to the other G is the only upwards resolution we get in the verses, but it goes somewhere we don't want to be. It's not a resolution so much as a cry of anguish, a flicker of defiance on Angel's part that is quickly snuffed as the vocals die out exactly where the resolution should have happened. The last thing to note is where the vocals align compared to the other instruments. In the verses, the vocals start in sync with the second synth, the voice that was apart from the rest of the instruments, before breaking off from everyone else with this half-beat syncopation, which places them right after the song's pulse, but right before the second synth. Then, right at the end of the first two-measure part of the sentence form, they seamlessly realign with the tresillo rhythm, holding together with it into the next measure and the repeat of the idea. This is repeated identically for the second part of the sentence form, but when the development comes and the harmony switches to A-flat major, the vocals remain aligned with the pulse of the song, breaking off shortly to return to their half-beat syncopation, before returning to being realigned with the song's pulse. This part of the verse, the first measure of the cadence, is the only time in the song where all instruments are all playing the exact same rhythm, and it behaves like a pause, especially with the vocals slowing down into longer notes and following the second synth in parallel motion. This temporary synchronization is then broken as the vocals abruptly cut away from the second synth, shortening the next note into a quaver to briefly realign with the tresillo, but then isolate themselves again, but this time between the second synth before and the tresillo after. The cadence leads us to a moment of respite where the vocals remain quiet as if Angel were reflecting on what he just said and what it means for him before moving on to the second stanza, the second half of the first verse. Now, in music writing, it isn't uncommon to have instruments occupy rhythm space differently, inserting themselves where other instruments are not busy in order to stand out, if at least briefly, before giving way for another instrument to play a note. This occurs especially often in accompanying instruments for texture or variety, filling space where the lead instrument is silent or less busy with ostinati or counter melodies. But here, the opposite is happening. The vocals, the clear lead instrument, is feeling space left in between the two parts of the second synth.
I'm not a bubble up to cash in. Another lover underneath those flashing lights. Another one of those ruthless nights. Yeah.
With my earlier interpretation that the right hand of the second synth represents Angel's hope, and the tresillo rhythm is part of Angel's stationary instability in his current life, then the vocals being so often out of sync with the other instruments is a testament to how conflicted and lost Angel is. He doesn't know where he wants to be, if he wants to find peace in his current situation or allow himself hope to escape. He's unable to choose which one he wants to leave behind and which one to stay in, because one of them hurts him and one of them scares him. The very rhythm of the vocals supports the conclusion that I drew from the harmonic analysis. There is no place for Angel, and that leads him to being stuck with himself. The vocals in the bridge take a shape unique in the song. As we saw earlier in the instrumentation analysis, the tresillo pulse is gone in the bridge, but still hinted at in the drums, leaving the actual pulse somewhat ambiguous. Well, the vocals increase this ambiguity even further because they mark the other pulse I discussed, the standard 4/4 meter, through the entire bridge with a simple quaver decoration at the end of the second measure to accommodate the lyrics. Even if technically they align with the second synth on the second beat of each measure, they don't actually feel like they're aligned with anything at all. They are alien and once again out of place. There isn't Valentino's repeated choir motif to haunt them anymore. For the first time in the song, it feels like Angel is truly alone, separate from his environment and his dreams, then thrown right back into them at the end after a pause when he resumes singing in the exact same manner as he started the verses. The melodic line in the bridge is also vastly simpler, built on a unique period form. With the whole bridge being on an F minor chord, the vocals start on the root F, hold it for 3 beats with a simple upper neighbor decoration, before moving down to the dominant C through this ambiguous unresolved 7th on E flat, the same that we saw in the verse before on G. This is the periods form idea. Then, for the contrasting section, they leap up to a surprising G, stay there for an extra beat, and return right back to C before moving back up to F with the opposite movement that led them to C in the first place. Finally, they repeat the first measure, the periods idea, but this time resolve back up to the tonic F for the cadence, exactly where the entire song pauses and the drums crash into the sub-bass. This is the most static the melody has been in the entire song, even more so than the verses, because of the mostly stepwise movement instead of leaps, and this, coupled with this slower, incredibly steady rhythm, gives it incredible weight and gravitas. This is a condemnation, where Angel, left alone with his thoughts, finally mourns the situation that he is in. However, again for the first time in the song, the melody also truly resolves upwards, not for a climax, but for a moment of silence at the apex of the tension the bridge was building. This doesn't express resignation or hopelessness, it's defiance, and Angel is about to show us in the chorus that he still has some fight in him. There is one thing to notice about this melodic line. It is the only part of the song that does not make use of the central motif we outlined earlier. This, as well as the unique period form, contributes to making the bridge stand out and feel alien, and helps build tension to lead into the chorus, because it feels like it introduces something new to the song, new material that the chorus is expected to develop. Also, a quick note, because I know someone's going to point this out in the comments. These second and third measures of the bridge here, with the vocals going from C to G, then back to C, and then up to E flat, the bass holding on E flat, and even the second synth starting on C, stepping up to D that, as we saw before, is a passing tone to E flat in the next measure. One could argue that the actual chord of the measure is an F minor, but a first inversion C minor chord, C minor over E flat. Similarly, one could argue that the next measure is actually in D diminished, or maybe a B flat major in first inversion, with that steady F in the melody decorated with simple dissonances, the D in the bass, and the second synth E flat resolving down to D with the unprepared suspension motif. Well, you're not incorrect, but analyzing these as C minor over E flat and either D diminished or B flat over D is unnecessary. These chords do exist as they are created by the instruments, but they aren't really functional, and they are perceived as dissonances leading to a goal rather than stable chords. They act as decorative chords to the steady F minor that the bridge starts and ends with. Their only function is to transition from the root position F minor to the second inversion F minor. That is why I said the whole bridge is in F minor, even if it technically goes through 2 different chords in the middle. These chords are not structurally significant. Also, as we saw before, the entire song is made of 4 bar units, so it makes more sense for the global structure to understand this as a single 4 bar block of F minor rather than 4 separate blocks of 3 different chords. As is usual in pop songs, the chorus represents an apex, in this case in terms of pitch. It is the highest Angel sings of the entire song, reaching far above the verses and the bridges. Here, this represents the peak of Angel's emotions after he suffered through the verses and risen in defiance in the bridges, but it isn't the fights that he sings about, it's surrender. The chorus begins exactly the same way as the verses did on that C, but this time as a 1.5 beat anacrusis, that is, before the beginning of the measure they should start on. The bridge was setting up a moment of defiance, and the vocals starting early reinforced that feeling as if Angel were breaking free, invigorated and eager to defend himself. This is reinforced even more because instead of repeating the C a fourth time, like in the verses, the vocals hold it over the measure, willingly going into that half-beat syncopation that isolates him, and then leap up into that unprepared suspension motif, which I think is clearest at this point of the song. The F is a dissonance, the unprepared suspension, which resolves down by step to E-flat, a chord tone. The vocals then leap back down to C and repeat the exact same melody, forming the beginning of another sentence form made of 1-bar units. Then, for the development, the melody holds for a very long time on a D, decorated with 2 lower neighbors, stepping into the consonant C but immediately escaping back to the non-chord tone. This is the first sign that something is wrong. Instead of a confident melody using its momentum to leap over the other instruments, it holds a particularly strong dissonance, a major second only above the first synth, and stays there the whole measure as if it got stuck, and instead of rising to freedom, Angel just made his situation worse. This is also seen in the rhythm the melody follows. Pay attention to the different syncopations. It starts with that 3-quaver anacrusis biting into the chorus, but then reduces it to 2 quavers, and finally settles on just 1 quaver for the development and the cadence. The energy that allowed Angel to leap into the chorus progressively disappears, almost to extinction, leaving him in a place of isolation, a whole new kind of isolation, because the syncopation in the verses was late, not early. Then, in the cadence of this first sentence form, Angel finally resolves the dissonance by stepping down to C and then gently stepping twice up through the D into the E-flat, a chord tone. This is a motif we've seen before. It was introduced in the middle of the bridge and served to link the 2 halves of its period form while injecting more energy into the very static melody. Well, the motif here isn't a link but a full stop. The resolution doesn't quite feel final because it stops on the 3rd of the chord, and more importantly, the first synth, which represented Valentino, takes over and leaps above Angel's voice once more. This entire sentence form then repeats almost identically. The only difference is that it starts once again on this 1-quaver anacrusis, but still stops by the 2-quaver syncopation we noticed earlier, which now gives it an uneasy, hesitant feeling. By this point, it is clear that the vocals aren't expressing any will to fight, but a defeat, and this is emphasized by the harmony switching here from C minor to A-flat major. Where the vocals started strong and confident, though shaken by the dissonant D, they become uneasy and weak, staying on that 3rd C and moving to a more unstable place even, E-flat. And when it finally settles on the E-flat that was so hesitant, the brightness of the major chord and the melody resting on its 5th, and Angel joining Valentino's instrument in the first synth in unison feels final. Angel has lost, his confidence has crumbled, and he's now fully given in to his situation, the vocals calling desperately for something to happen. So what happens? Angel cries. The vocals come to a complete halt here, using the slowest rhythm in the entire song, a series of minims or half notes, each holding for 2 beats. Contrapuntally, this is simply a high G held for 2 entire measures, with a double neighbor decoration. And the choice to step down first instead of up is a distant reminder of the core motif to the song, now used to embody the most intense of Angel's pain. The desperation is still there, and it's become a primal cry that sums up all of Angel's emotions through the song, from his despair to his suffering. It's very telling that the vocals don't even sing any lyrics here, but just a simple vocalization instead. Angel realigns with the full 4 beat, with his environment, just like he did in the bridge, and just screams on that high G, hopeless, in agony, unable to even express himself anymore. The second section of the chorus is, surprisingly, a period form with 2-bar units. After the basic idea that we just saw, the vocals go back to a steady quaver rhythm, representative of Valentino's complete hold over Angel. In the previous section of the chorus, the melody held over a dissonance, the D in the C minor chord, and now it repeats that, but higher, holding an F for 2.5 beats with the same neighbor decoration as before, but flip upside down as it steps up to the dominant G, then back down to the dissonant F. It then steps down again to a chord tone E flat, and this movement is done in sync with the second synth, forming an extremely dissonant 7th interval between the two. It then leaps down a third to the reed C, still dissonant with the second synth, and finally steps down once again to B flat, the 7th, before leaping back up to F to repeat this bar identically. We've seen this motif before. It's the same decoration we found in the bridge, but flipped upside down, and it lands on this unidentifiable dissonance on the 7th like the verses did before. Then the cry returns, but this time on an A-flat major chord, which means the G held over 2 bars is no longer a chord tone, but a dissonance. It could be seen as the 7th of an A-flat major 7th chord. This being the chorus could mean that the harmony expands, and it does resolve down by step towards the F from earlier, so this is legitimate, but I think it still functions as a dissonance. First of all, although it resolves down to another dissonance, a 6th above the chord root, whereas a normal 7th should resolve to consonance on a different chord. Secondly, and more importantly, I think this increased dissonance represents Angel's growing distress. I described the chorus earlier as a surrender because this is the point where Angel confesses that he is aware of his situation, but rather than just being powerless to stop it, it seems he actively chooses to stay in the situation because he's become accustomed to the comfort it gives him and maybe even to the pain that comes with it. The chorus does start on a lot of consonances. Even the motive central to the song, which we've seen so far as a destabilizing element, functions as intended and resolves to a consonance. But in the chorus, this stability only lasts 2 bars, first as the 2 ideas of the first sentence form, and then as the first idea of the period form. So in both cases, the vocals express a form of stability that devolves into a longer, more harrowing instability. This is why I interpret this G as a dissonance, not as part of an extended chord, and this is why to me it represents the growing pain that Angel willingly subjects himself to. Finally, in the cadence of the period form, the dissonant melody from earlier is repeated, but then holds onto that bizarre B flat, not a 7th anymore here, but clearly a dissonance, and the entire chorus concludes on this central motif, once again resolving properly on the consonants, in this case the dominant of the chord, and crucially, the vocals and even the whole song fall into silence. It's time to look at the lyrics. Now, I'm not a lyricist, and I don't know how to write lyrics. I do write poetry, though, mostly in my native language, but I'm not sure how close to poetry lyric writing is. So I'm not going to discuss the quality of the lyrics, the verses, the rhymes, any of that stuff, or talk about prosody and whatnot. I am going to focus on how the lyrics interact with the music and how they contribute to each other's meanings. The lyrics open on the phrase, which immediately sets the tone. This is not going to be a self-empowering song. I'm Not Above betrays a sense of shame. It shows that all the vanity and pride that Angel has displayed around everyone so far is just a front, and in reality he bears no pride for his work. And yet, the phrase also shows that this is something that Angel wants, just that he's ashamed of it. And here, the downward resolution in the vocals cements this as an affirmation, a statement. Angel isn't questioning himself or his situation here, he's making a confession. I'll group the next 3 lines together because they all talk about Angel's environment with the flashing lights and the rough nights.
Another lover underneath those flashing lights. Another one of those ruthless nights. Yeah.
Here again, the phrasing shows that Angel is unhappy with his situation. Another one of those ruthless nights shows that he dreads working, and that's another dent in his carefully crafted facade, the one that originally made me dislike the character. I really want to emphasize how powerful this first verse is. The song completely shatters what we thought we knew about Angel, without even being direct about it, and then leaves us with the rest of the song but with an open mind, after learning that the Angel we had been acquainted with and thought we had learned to know after 3 episodes was a fabrication. There's more. Let's have a look at where the lyrics sit in terms of harmony. We can see that the C minor stanza here mostly talks about Angel himself, or the way he sees things. It's interesting, by the way, that he refers to his co-workers as lovers, whereas the A-flat major stanza is entirely about his environment. This actually tracks with what we've discussed before, and it also reinforces my second interpretation of the ending of the vocals. This holds up in the second verse too, and it builds up on what we learned already.
I should've guessed that this would happen. I should've known it when I looked in your red hot eyes, spewing all your red hot lies. Yeah.
I should have guessed that this would happen shows that Angel is acutely aware of his situation, yet still walking into it. Once again, something we had already concluded with our earlier analysis. I really like the image of the red-hot eyes and lies here. Sure, the description is accurate to what Valentino looks like, but red-hot usually describes a hot metal, and the implication here subtly is that Valentino is responsible for Angel's pain. Objectively, it is true, and we know that. The beginning of the episode went to great length to show it, but it is a surprise to see it expressed so clearly and so directly by Angel himself. Now this is where the lyrics become really interesting, and the song stops being subtle to just blast an unexpected and very uncomfortable truth in our faces.
What's the worst part of this hell? I can only blame myself.
Angel blames himself for this situation. This retroactively explains and confirms the first 2 verses already, but it also explains why the second synth was so alien and out of place if, as we concluded, it represents Angel's hope. It implies that Angel believes he deserves to suffer and doesn't want to allow himself to want an escape. And yet the entire song is about him doing exactly that, facing himself and confessing that he is broken and he wants out. Since the bridge uses a new chord, we can assume that the next bridge, or the F minor chord, is about Angel finally being honest with himself, and we can expect the second bridge to contain another revelation, although honestly I don't think anything can top this one. What about the choruses now?
'Cause I know you're poison, you're feeding me poison. Addicted to this feeling, I can't help but swallow up your poison. I made my choices. Every night I'm living like there's no tomorrow. Any way you want me, baby, that's the way you got me. I'll be yours. My story's gonna end with me dead from your poison.
Our interpretation of the meanings of the different chords actually holds up here. The chorus begins by confirming what the song had been implying, that Angel is fully aware of his situation and willingly walking into it, but finally gives us a glimpse of why he is so eager to. It's addiction. Now, I remember reading that Angel's name is actually short for angel dust, which is phenylcyclohexylpiperidine? Yeah, I don't know anything about these topics, but the word addicted being used directly is a rather direct nod to that. And once again, the surprise is how clearly aware Angel seems to be. There's something interesting that happens here though. I made my choice is a line that happens over an A-flat major harmony, which as we saw before were about Angel's environment, and yet it's a line about Angel himself that we would expect in C minor instead. So, what's the implication here? I think this means that Angel thinks he was coerced into making this choice, something that he explains in full in the next song, Loser Baby. I love that one too, by the way, easily my second favorite in the show. And again, the living like there's no tomorrow line appears to be out of place, but I think it shows that Angel's debauchery isn't about finding joy or pleasure in his life, but just surviving in an environment that doesn't give him enough to even look forward to the next day. Then the chorus ends on what really isn't a surprise anymore at this point. Angel fears for his life. This is important because it finally gives us insight into his motivations. The Hazbin Hotel is his ticket out. If it is possible to cleanse the soul and grant them access to heaven as Charlie wants, then that is the way he will escape from Valentino before it's too late. I want to add, I really love the enjambment there and the way the sentence stands between the two stanzas. The phrase swallow up being split between the two gives them such an incredibly strong bond, and at the same time, the up completing the swallow, while the vocals drop from E flat to C, if you remember, also means that the half cadence at the end of the C minor chord is immediately resolved, and that contributes to giving the chorus the incredible energy that it has. The next verse opens on a line that mirrors the end of the second.
I got so good at being untrue. I got so good at telling you what you wanna hear. I disassociate, disappear. Yeah.
This time, it's Angel telling lies, and as we learn, playing a character, but the wording is interesting. He doesn't call his lies lies, he calls them untrue, and defends them as being something he has to do in order to survive. The disassociate, disappear here refers to him as in his actual personality, in front of which he's built this mask of unbearable vanity and misplaced pride. This is illustrated unbelievably well in the video, especially for the first chorus, where Angel is clearly shown depressed as he sings the self-blame line, but then perks up, smiles, and changes abruptly before engaging in this weirdly hypnotizing dance with Valentino. Seriously, the first time I watched the show, I must have gone back like 10 times just to rewatch that dance. Every time Angel is shown preparing for a scene, he's dog, looking down, clearly dejected. Then he abruptly smiles like he's entering a character, which he really is, except the character isn't just for his work, it's a whole persona he's fabricated to shield himself from his hell. Do you remember I mentioned that the third verse was alone and sped up the arrival of the last chorus and said, for reasons we'll see later? Well, let's take a short break from looking at the lyrics to go back to the harmonic relationships, but with the new conclusions we've drawn so far. As a reminder, the conclusions we drew about the different chords were that A-flat major is the most stable chord, though still unstable compared to the tonic. The lyrics showing A-flat major as Angel's environment do support this idea, and also my interpretation of the song ending. Angel does return to his environment at the end, but without fully surrendering. Then, we identified C minor as the weakest chord and explained that it actually had very strong pull towards F minor. That means that Angel's reflections about how he really feels are the ones that led him to the shattering realizations that he makes. And that means that the absence of a fourth verse shows that Angels is fighting his conclusions less. He doesn't need as much thinking to reach them again. He's coming to terms with the truth, and that is exactly how the entirety of the lyrics is built. And what is that truth? The truth is that he can't stop.
So far beyond difficult to resist another gulp.
For how aware of his situation he is, Angel is completely powerless to escape, and he frames it as a fault of his. That ties in really well with the rest of the song, and that's why his hope, represented by the alien second synth, is so out of reach. He believes that he cannot escape on his own, and his hope isn't for an opportunity, but for a savior, someone like Charlie, who might be the only person capable of saving him. The beginning of the second chorus essentially repeats that.
Yeah, I know it's poison, you're feeding me poison. I'm choking from the taste and I can't help but swallow up your poison. I made my choice and every night I'm wasted like there's no tomorrow. Any way you want me, baby, that's the way you got me, I'll be yours. My story's gonna end with me dead from your poison.
A large part of the chorus is identical, and the repetition with only mild changes is absolutely gorgeous. But there is also progression. Look at the middle lines of the two choruses. Angel goes from living to being wasted. There's clearly no joy in it anymore, and he's getting more and more desperate. Of course, the final line being repeated really anchors this desperation, but there is progress, and we're not done yet. There's one more chorus to go.
Poison, I'm drowning in poison. I'm feeling the up my glass, but it's always hollow, full of poison. I'm sick of the poison. Wish I had something to live for tomorrow.
Do you remember how, in this final chorus, most of the background instruments go away, leaving only Angel, his hope, and a vague drone representing Valentino in the background? I had concluded in the instrumentation analysis that this was Angel's chance to tell us how he really feels without anyone watching, but with Valentino still present somewhere. And not only do the lyrics confirm everything about that, they actually build up to this moment. Angel is at his most vulnerable because he is at his most honest, and he tells us about pain and fear and finally his dream. The progression of the choruses culminates here. He went from swallowing to choking to now drowning, and he is tired and scared of it. The use of hollow here is particularly brilliant. One could certainly argue that the word was chosen for the rhyme with tomorrow, but its effect is great. You would expect a "I'm filling up my glass but it's always empty" to reference a Tantalus-style punishment, but that's not quite where Angel stands. He has abundant access to everything he wants, but nothing gives him joy or meaning. His glass isn't empty, it's very full, and the lyrics have explicitly mentioned that. But they've also explained at length that it is hollow. And all this, every line in the entire song, leads to this final admission as Angel breaks down alone in his room. He craves meaning. This, I think, is the other side of why he cares so much about the Hazbin Hotel. It's the first thing he's found that gives him a chance to find meaning in something. That's why he likes Charlie so much, because she found meaning in her endeavor, and he envies and idolizes her for being able to do that. The Hazbin Hotel is his only hope, the only way he could possibly escape his hell, a hell of his own making.
What's the worst part of this hell? I can only blame myself.
There is a lesson to be learned here, at least for me, and that is, it matters more to be intentional than to be clever. What I mean by that is that you don't need complicated, extravagant tools to write a masterpiece. If you use them well, you can use the simplest tools you have, and the effect will be even greater. This song is proof of it, and kind of awakened me to the idea. There is absolutely nothing even remotely complicated in it, not even chord inversions. Just 3 chords, a motif, and absolute mastery over them. If I had to guess how this song came to be, I would hazard that the composer came up with the chorus first.
'Cause I know you're poison, you're feeding me poison.
Notice the motif and build the entire song around it. What makes this song so special and so good is the way all the choices intertwine to build meaning together. And this isn't me picking random elements and assigning a preconceived meaning to them based on what I wanted them to say. The song works. Proof is, the song hit me somewhere deep on first listen, before I was aware of anything of the things I explained in this video. This is my raw reaction when I first encountered the song. I was chatting with the friend who recommended me the show at the time. From the first time I heard the song, I was completely enthralled, because all the things I spent so long deciphering really do work. Now, there is a reason why this song hit me so hard and has such a special place in my heart. In October 2023, I tried to participate in a composing competition for Halloween after already facing failure a few months prior and trying to push through my complete lack of confidence. I tried to write something spooky, but I hated the piece that I wrote so much that I never submitted it or even finished it, and started becoming really depressed about my skill or my potential as a composer. A friend then commissioned me for a character theme for her OC, who also had spooky vibes. That was my chance to redeem myself from my abject failure. That was the piece that would decide if I would continue composing or not. And that piece is, to this day, one of my favorites of mine. It's Danse Spectrale. Now, I did a lot of things right with it, but the one thing that really made it work was how much I focused on the storytelling in it. Except, I took the wrong lesson from it. At the time, I was trying to study some of the pieces I loved, especially the Nier Automata and Genshin Impact OSTs, and I thought, wrongly, that it was their crazy harmony and complicated chromaticism that made them so good. I tried to emulate that in Danse Spectrale, and it worked, but not for the chromaticism. Unfortunately, I kept digging further into it, to the point where I started questioning what I was doing again. And then I faced another critical, overwhelming failure, one that nearly made me quit music again. That was in June 2024, and the 19th was when I first encountered Poison. I was despondent at the time, completely disillusioned that I had any sort of skill in composition whatsoever, but I hadn't given up. I was trying to reevaluate my process and see where I went wrong. That was when I first tried to simplify my music, to make chromaticism less omnipresent, but more impactful. The piece that came from that is the one I consider to be my best so far, Shimmering Waltz. That is why the song is so important to me. Because at the time it came in my life, just like Angel, I too was broken. Because just like Angel, I had no hope for the future, at least in terms of composition. Because just like Angel, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Because just like Angel, I too was lost.